In 1975, Kodak quietly built the world's first handheld digital camera, then spent the next 2 decades protecting film until digital photography wiped billions off its business. Before the word digital meant anything to most people, Kodak was photography. According to the company's own history, Eastman Kodak had been expanding globally since the early 1900s, building subsidiaries in the UK by 1898, Australia by 1908, France and Germany by the early 1930s, and locking in huge markets like motion pictures by becoming the sole supplier of film to Thomas Edison's Motion Picture Patents Company in 1908. By 1914, they'd built their headquarters in Rochester, New York. By 1922, they were the second largest buyer of silver in the United States, thanks to all that film and paper they were producing. This was not a scrappy startup. This was a century-old cash machine. At its peak, as summarized by Stratrix's Kodak Shelves its digital camera case study, Kodak reportedly controlled around 90% of the film market. Film was the core product, and everything else, cameras, chemicals, photo paper, even the famous yellow boxes, orbited that sun. The incentives were simple: sell more film, sell more processing, sell more prints. Inside that world, executives were paid, promoted, and praised for one thing: protecting and growing the film empire. That context is critical for what happens next. In 1975, a 24-year-old Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson walked into that film-first culture with something that broke the rules. Using a monochrome CCD sensor made by Fairchild Semiconductor, about 10,000 pixels, according to Kodak's own history and Sasson's patent, he built the first battery-operated handheld digital camera prototype. It was famously described as looking like a toaster with a lens. Instead of exposing film, the device captured light on that tiny CCD, converted it into electronic data, and stored it on a cassette tape. An Instagram summary of the story notes that this prototype could capture electronic images, store them on tape, and prove that film was no longer strictly necessary to take a picture. It wasn't fast, sleek, or consumer-friendly. Snopes, citing contemporary coverage and interviews, stresses that early versions took roughly 20 seconds to record a single image and required a separate playback unit connected to a TV. By any practical standard, this thing wasn't ready for your family vacation, but it worked. Kodak filed for and received a patent for an electronic still camera in 1978, naming Sasson as an inventor. Multiple sources, including the patent itself and later profiles of Sasson, credit this as the first portable digital still camera. In other words, Kodak had just built the future of photography inside a company whose profits depended on film. Inside Kodak, the digital camera wasn't the only signal that change was coming. According to a summary on Kodak's Wikipedia entry, another employee, Larry Madison, wrote an internal report in 1979 predicting a complete shift to digital photography by around 2010. Stratrix's case study adds that a 1981 internal study at Kodak accurately forecast the timeline of digital disruption. Think about that. By the early 1980s, Kodak had 2 crucial pieces of information. 1. Their engineers could make cameras that didn't need film. 2. Their own strategists believed that by roughly 2010, most photography would be digital. If you're running a film empire, that's not a rumor. That's your own research telling you your core business has an expiration date. Stratrix argues that this is where the real strategic fork appeared. When your own data tells you a disruption is coming, you either believe it and act, or you protect what's working and hope it's wrong. Kodak largely chose the second path. The popular internet story says, Kodak invented digital, then hid it to protect film. The reality is messier. Snopes investigated the claim and rated it a mixture of truth and falsehood. They confirmed that Kodak engineer Steve Sasson did invent the first portable digital camera in 1975, and that Kodak got a patent in 1978, but didn't put it into production. But Snopes also notes that one of the main reasons was practical. The device was slow, bulky, expensive, and there wasn't a real consumer market yet. Kodak did continue to develop the technology instead of simply locking it in a vault. Kodak's own history backs this up. Executives were reluctant to make a strong pivot into digital because it would require heavy investment for what looked like a very limited early market and would throw Kodak into direct competition with established computer hardware companies. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, that meant moving away from their comfortable chemistry and film business into semiconductors, electronics, and software. Stratrix's analysis adds another layer: internal politics. At Kodak, the film division controlled the budgets and the promotions. Digital projects lived inside a structure built to sell film. Any serious digital push would threaten the very leaders who decided where the money went. So Kodak did what big incumbents often do. They hedged, they filed patents, they experimented. According to a 1991 news clipping cited by Snopes, Kodak even launched a professional digital camera system that turned a Nikon body into a digital camera for photojournalists and government surveillance at around $20,000 per unit. But that's not the same as saying, we are going to build a consumer digital business even if it cannibalizes film. The center of gravity, the incentives, the power, the culture, stayed with film. Stratrix argues that Kodak didn't have to choose between film and digital, at least not at first. The smarter move would have been to build a true digital business alongside film, with its own profit and loss statement, its own leadership, and protection from the film division's institutional antibodies. Instead, digital lived in the shadow of film. The Instagram summary of the story captures the consequence. While Kodak had proven with Sason's prototype that film wasn't strictly necessary, it was Sony, Canon, Nikon, and eventually smartphone makers who pushed forward with smaller, faster, cheaper digital cameras. Meanwhile, Kodak kept optimizing film, the thing its own 1979 to 1981 studies said would become obsolete by around 2010. Every year of delay made the eventual shift harder. The longer film profits stayed fat, the more career risk there was in betting on a low-margin, uncertain digital future. Stratrix points out that when strategic planning is captured by incumbent politics, the disruptive option almost always loses. This is the heart of the autopsy. Kodak didn't just have the technology, it had the forecast. What it lacked was the organizational will to let a new business grow strong enough to threaten the old one. For a while, the strategy of defending film looked rational. Kodak could point to early digital cameras and say, they're too expensive, too clunky, and people love prints. But technology curves are nonlinear. As CCD sensors improved, as microchips got cheaper, and as consumer demand shifted toward instant viewing and sharing, digital cameras moved from niche professional tools to mainstream gadgets. The Instagram summary notes that as Sony, Canon, and Nikon advanced with smaller, faster, cheaper digital devices, film sales fell rapidly, and Kodak's profit base shrank. Remember Larry Madison's prediction that photography would be fully digital by around 2010? Look at your own photo library today. That internal forecast was astonishingly close. By the time Kodak tried to move more aggressively into consumer digital cameras, they were one brand among many, no longer the gatekeeper of photography. Worse, the most explosive wave of all came not from standalone cameras, but from smartphones, which turned images into software and data, not just hardware. The value Kodak had protected by delaying digital, it didn't survive. It was eroded anyway, just captured by other companies and other business models. Stratrix sums it up as a brutal rule. The revenue you think you're saving by avoiding self-cannibalization is usually destroyed later by competitors at a far higher cost. Decades after that first toaster with a lens, Steve Sasson was on vacation in Yellowstone with his family. In a BBC feature on the story behind the first handheld digital camera, Sasson recalls watching a crowd gather to take a picture of a geyser. Around him, he saw people lifting film cameras, video cameras, and digital cameras. He turned to his wife and said, "It's happening." He explained that this was exactly what he had tried to describe in the 1970s. A world where electronic cameras would be everywhere. And now he was standing in that world, a world his invention helped create, as just another tourist. By this point, as accounts collected by Snopes note, his work had been recognized at the highest levels. In 2009, President Barack Obama awarded Sasson the U.S. National Medal of Technology and Innovation for his contributions to digital photography. The tragedy is that the technology succeeded. The prediction was right. The engineer was honored. It was the business model that died. This isn't just a story about one company missing a tech trend. It's about what happens when you let your current profit engine veto your future. Here's the central lesson Stratrix draws from Kodak's strategic fork. When your own data says a disruption is coming, believe it, and build the new business, even if it threatens the old one. Kodak's internal studies in 1979 and 1981 told them digital would take over by about 2010. Their engineers had the tech, but the film division controlled the money, so digital never got the independence it needed. For you, the scale is smaller, but the pattern is the same. Maybe you run a business that makes most of its money from one product, even as customer behavior is drifting somewhere else. Maybe you're in a career where the skills that pay you today are different from the skills that will matter in 10 years. The easy move is to ignore the scary forecast and double down on what's working. The smart move is to cannibalize yourself before competitors do, as Stratrix puts it. That could mean spinning up a small, protected team or side business built around the new reality, with its own goals and metrics. Reinvesting some of today's surplus into learning skills that might temporarily lower your short-term income but protect your long-term earning power. Separating your planning from your current incentives, asking, if I were starting from scratch today, knowing what I know about the next decade, what would I build? Kodak's mistake wasn't failing to invent the future. It was failing to let that future change how it made money. Your job is to avoid that same trap with your career, your investments, and your business. Kodak proves that inventing the future isn't enough. You have to be willing to let it threaten your present. When your own research says disruption is coming, build and protect the new business or skill set, even if it cannibalizes the thing that pays you today, because the revenue you save by standing still is usually destroyed later by competitors. If you want more money autopsies like this, real stories of fortunes made and lost, and the lessons hiding inside, hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what part of your own financial life are you clinging to like Kodak clung to film, even though you know the world is changing?